Bulgaria it's one of those countries that was part of the former Soviet bloc. So there's a lot of communistic influence, you could say. So your thoughts aren't too far off. When we first landed, I remember seeing just like the standard building is these large, just cement block buildings, and they're really ugly, and they're just everywhere. They're getting older, and so they're kind of worn down. There's graffiti everywhere, and I just remember like, oh man, where am I? This is like completely foreign from what I'm used to in a small southern Utah town. And that was the capital, and so I of course didn't want to serve in the capital, but of course that's where the Lord sent me originally. So, but yeah, it's not the prettiest. The cities themselves aren't necessarily the prettiest. There's a lot of this cement kind of gray looking buildings. In the wintertime, everything's really kind of dirty. And so my first week was quite eye-opening, you could say. Just not quite what I expected. Really busy, kind of dirty, cement, graffiti, just completely different world than what I was used to. So that was kind of my first impressions. Just kind of like, wow, this is much different than what I'm used to. It's important for missionaries to go there to know that the church is really young there and the church is really small there. In 2011, they celebrated 20 years of the church being in Bulgaria. So it hasn't been there very long, and because the church is so small, missionary work there is quite different in that you really have to lead the church there. And whatever branch you may go to, there are only branches, no wards or stakes. Whatever branch you go to, you're going to be called on to really help out in the branch, whether that's being the elders quorum president or being a branch president or a number of different callings. As a greenie, my very first city, they made me the elders quorum president, and I was blown away. I didn't know what to do, but so just I feel like that's something that a missionary going to Bulgaria should know, should be aware of, and be ready for. But I will say this, like the Lord really blesses you and prepares you for the tasks that you're asked to perform. I was asked to be a branch president in a city after being in the country for not too long. And I remember just feeling honestly really blown away and just, how can I do this? It was my first time being a senior companion, and so I was just barely starting to feel like I had the language down. And then they make me a branch president, and I remember feeling really kind of worried. How can I serve this branch? How can I do this when I know so little? I'm only 19. What do I do? And so I would just, I bear my testimony of the power that God has in helping us become who He needs us to be. If we're humble, if we really try to turn ourselves over to God and allow Him to be in charge. I saw that the most during my time as a branch president. It was the hardest time of my mission, and even in a small branch, you wouldn't think much would happen, but there were a lot of things that really tested me and really stretched, what I thought I could do. But every time I was amazed at how much the Lord blessed me. And as I looked back, I could see little things that He did in my mission prior to my calling as a branch president to really prepare me for things I would do. So I just have such a strong testimony that the Lord really can make more of you and prepare you for things that you didn't think you could ever do as you really work hard, as you're obedient, as you turn your life over to God and let Him be in charge. So I just feel like that's an important thing for a new missionary coming to Bulgaria to know, that you may be asked to do some fairly difficult things or to step in leadership ways that you never thought you would ever be able to do. But just to know that God will help you. You're not asked to do something that you can't do. And so I really felt like that, and that was one lesson that I feel is really important that I learned, and that I would really want to pass on to someone else, that God will help you, and He'll help you become more than you ever thought you possibly could be. I loved the food in Bulgaria. Like, it was awesome. and it's one of the things I miss the most about the country. As I've mentioned, it's in the Balkans, so it's a very fertile country, and there's just fruits and vegetables everywhere. And so, during the spring, summer, fall, you get different different fruits and vegetables that come into season, and they've got fruit stands and vegetable stands all over the place. And so you can just get all sorts of fruits and vegetables that are absolutely delicious. And then when you get into the winter, you maybe get a little more of the meats, mostly like pork and lamb and chicken. It's more kind of hearty meals with potatoes and carrots, onions, things like that. So honestly, just a lot of like really natural foods that are just loved it. It was really good. Some more specific things, a really traditional thing they eat there is salad, specifically something called shopska salata, which is, it's basically cucumbers and tomatoes, chunks in a bowl, and maybe some onions, and they serve it to you, and then you can put cheese over it, or maybe some balsamic oil, or balsamic and oil on it. And at the beginning of my mission, it was kind of hard to eat. I'm not a big tomato guy, but by the end of my mission, I loved it. So that's a really traditional thing. They have bread with almost every meal, and the bread is fantastic. Several missionaries kind of gained weight, you could say, probably from the bread. You may have heard of dooners. They're kind of a thing that is influenced by Turkey. And I would say they're kind of like the fast food of Bulgaria. They're basically like a flatbread with a special white sauce that they put on it, and then fries and grilled chicken, and depending on the city, different types of vegetables or rice, things like that. And then they wrap it all up, and it's just this tube of greasy, yummy goodness. Like, it's really good. I really would like one of these days. So those are really good. Bulgaria is kind of famous for yogurt. They claim that yogurt came from Bulgaria. I don't know how true that is, but the yogurt there is absolutely delicious. So that's pretty big. They have pastries called banitsa, and those are quite delicious as well. It's kind of this really thin dough. If you're familiar with phyllo dough, it's like phyllo dough. It's kind of like paper thin dough, and they'll put like different things in it. The most common is made from a really salty cheese called sirene. And egg, it's kind of mixed up together, and then they sprinkle it on this dough and then wrap it up and kind of wrap it into like a circle and then bake it. And that's a really common pastry. You'll eat that quite a bit, and it's fantastic. You also get different variants like apple banitsa or pumpkin banitsa depending on the season. So those were always really delicious. Yeah, I mean, lots of yogurt. They put plain yogurt on a lot of different things on the side of dishes, or they'll water it down and make it a drink or a soup. Like, they do lots of different things with yogurt. So, but like I said, Bulgarian food is absolutely fantastic. I can't really say that I ever ate anything that bad. I'd say the worst thing I ate was maybe some fish that had been left out and was a little cold, but other than that, like, it was fantastic. Loved it. Like I mentioned, Bulgaria is a pretty old country, so there's a lot of cultural traditions and history behind the stuff they do. One thing that comes to mind is the head nod. The head nod is backwards in Bulgaria, so this would be no, and this would be yes. So I still mess it up, but so when you're a greenie, when you first get there, that's like super confusing. Everyone's going, no, and you're like, oh yeah, you do want to talk to me? And like, no, and you're like, you get confused. But so that's kind of an interesting little cultural thing, and it takes a while to get used to. Other things, there are a lot of holiday type things. They're really big into name days. So the main religion there is Bulgarian Orthodox. And with that, they celebrate a lot of the saints, and they have these name days that correspond with tons of saints. I think there's over 200 name days. And so it's kind of like a second birthday. If it's your name day, then you celebrate basically like a birthday, and people will give you little gifts, or you'll get together with family or friends and celebrate. So some of the name days are bigger kind of national holidays. Most of them are kind of just little things that you would just celebrate by yourself. But so name days are pretty big. Another big thing is March. The beginning of March, from March 1st till the end of March, is the beginning. It's the celebration of the coming of spring, and with that you wear martinizi, which are these little. They're generally bracelets or like a little pin made out of red and white yarn, and the week before March, you'll go out and buy a bunch of these, and then March 1st, you hand them out to all your friends and all your family members, and you're supposed to wear the martinitsa, and it symbolizes the coming of spring and helps kind of ward off the evils of winter and welcome spring. And it's a really fun tradition. As missionaries, everyone in the branch is giving you martinitsi, and so you've got several bracelets, and it's rude if you don't wear all the bracelets that you're given, so you might get quite a few. And it's a really fun tradition. You wear these all the way until either you see a stork or the first tree blossom. And when you see a stork or a tree blossom, you take off the bracelet and you tie it on the tree. And so, it may be fall and you'll run into a tree that's got tons of these martinitsi hanging from it, and you're like, oh, that was the first tree to blossom this spring. But it's just a really fun time of the year. The 3rd of March is like their Independence Day, so it kind of coincides with this whole celebration of March and spring and martinitsi, and it's just really kind of a fun tradition. Other ones I can think of are kind of religious holidays. Easter and Christmas obviously are pretty big, and deal with a lot with the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. Everyone goes to midnight mass, and as missionaries they would let us go kind of in secret. We couldn't wear our name tags. And we get to go to the cathedrals and kind of watch their rituals, their celebrations there at the church buildings. So that was always a really neat thing. New Year's is kind of a crazy time as well. I've heard many countries are kind of like this, but their fireworks there are more like bombs than anything. It's not really like the sparkly things. It's like firecrackers that are on steroids, and so it sounds like a war zone at midnight, and people are quite crazy. But it's pretty fun to witness and watch from your apartment. We're not allowed to go out, obviously, but so yeah, there's lots of really neat cultural things about Bulgaria. Those are just some of them that come to mind. The importance of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, it influences them quite a bit. They're quite proud of it. It's got a long history, and they're really proud of the fact that like the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, even during like the 500 years of Turkish bondage, and even during communism where religion wasn't really allowed to be practiced, like it survived kind of secretly and almost underground. Like it survived, and so they're pretty proud of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church and that it's stuck around for so long. So it has a fair amount of influence on the country, and everyone will tell you I'm Pravoslav, which means I believe in the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. And so, they may not go to church very often. Most people probably only go Easter and Christmas. But it's definitely a very influential part of Bulgaria, and everyone's pretty proud of it, and they want to be connected to the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. So I'd say that that's a pretty big thing to understand about Bulgarians, is that they take that part pretty serious. They basically have two types of cheeses. One's sirene and the other's kashkaval. Sirene is a really salty cheese, kind of like feta, but you can't find like real sirene in America. It's really hard to find, we'll say that. And same with the kashkaval. It's kind of like a mozzarella cheese, but it's a little different. the yogurt there is, like I said, amazing, but again, it's a little different. And so like there's lots of little things like that where you can buy stuff that's similar-ish, but not quite in America. Another pretty common thing is lutenica, and it's like a tomato-based paste with lots of different vegetables and different things kind of mashed into it. And it's really good. And again, you can find similar things in America, but not the same. And then on the reverse side, when you get to Bulgaria, there are a fair number of things. I remember one in particular was like syrup. You can't find syrup, and so everyone would always ask for like the syrup mixes, and we'd make up our own watery kind of gross syrup, but it was syrup, so we liked it. You can't, unless they're starting to get more like American restaurants there. Like Burger King was just new during my mission, so that was a pretty big thing. And they've obviously got McDonald's, and they have KFC and Subway. So you'll see those common things. But outside of like those restaurants, you can't really like buy a hamburger or anything. I know I went to a Bulgarian restaurant once, and they said they had a cheeseburger on the menu, and I thought that was strange for a Bulgarian restaurant. So I ordered it, and it ended up being a cheese sandwich, really. It was 2 pieces of bread with cheese in the middle. It wasn't a cheeseburger at all. So, so I mean, that was interesting. They have fries there. They said, I mean, the food there is amazing, so you may not be able to find everything American, but you're definitely not going to starve because you'll find really good food there. And there's a lot of pizza restaurants there, although the pizza is a little different. It's really flat. They don't put hardly any sauce on it. And then they've got some of the toppings are kind of strange. I once ordered a pepperoni pizza, and it came as a pizza with hot dogs on it. So be careful when you order pepperoni pizza. And then there's a surprising number of like Chinese restaurants, although you don't hardly ever see Chinese people, but those are pretty good, and they're a lot like Chinese here. So, so you'll survive. You'll find some good stuff. You'll miss a few things from America, sure, but the foods there is great, so you'll be fine. I'll admit I'm probably not an expert in this area. As a missionary, I mean, you hear some stuff, but obviously you don't live there and you don't have kids that grow up there, so I don't know everything as well. But from what I remember and recall, as far as the school system, they go to, the equivalent of like an elementary school and middle school. And then from what I recall, as you get to the high school type of age, they actually send you to kind of specific trade school high schools. So if you want to become a certain career or do a certain thing, you'd go to a high school that more focused on that area. And I mean, they'll teach you everything, but they'll focus in that kind of one areas mostly. And then from there you can go on to college, or sometimes that high school education is enough to do what you want to do in that career. I remember one city that I served in, Sleven, and they're pretty known for their wrestling, and so they have a wrestling high school specifically. And so as we go around the park, the high school is right across the street, and the wrestlers would be running around the park doing their laps and getting in shape. So I always thought that was interesting. It was like a wrestling specific high school. So yeah, that's kind of how the school system works. As you get to the high school, you kind of start branching out to what you're going to become in life. And then there are universities that you can go to. And I don't know how specific those universities are, if it's like the high schools or not, or if they're kind of general universities like in America. As far as the government, I'm probably even more shaky on this category, but it is a democratic government. And as I mentioned, it was just kind of adopted into the EU, and they're slowly starting to build up the standards of the country to EU standards. They have elections quite commonly. I don't really know a whole lot about how the government works. It's democratic. Bulgaria is it's a pretty old country. It's been around for a long time. I want to say around 1000 AD, maybe a little bit before that. Some semblance of Bulgaria, not the same Bulgaria that we see today, but so it's a fairly old country with a lot of history behind it. And I guess kind of the major things is they were kind of their own country for a while in the surrounding areas. And then around the 1300s is when the Ottoman Empire and the Turks came over, and they took over and kind of enslaved Bulgarians for 500 years. And if you go to Bulgaria, the Bulgarians will talk about this all the time. They'll talk about the 500 years that we were under Turkish bondage, and so they're still really bitter against the Turks for that. But that comes up quite a bit, and so they were under Turkish bondage until about 1890-ish, and then the Russians kind of helped free them, and they were their own country for a while. And then after World War II, they kind of became part of the Soviet bloc and were a communist country up until 89, 90. And now they're their own kind of government, democratic government, trying to make their way. They just got into the EU not too long ago, so they're making their way. They're still a poorer country by EU standards, but they're making strides. So I mean, their history is something they take a lot of pride in, and they'll talk a fair amount about that when you're over there. Especially, like I mentioned about the Turkish bondage, they bring that up all the time. So yeah, it's a rich historical country. Bulgarian, it's pretty difficult, at least it was for me. It's a Slavic language, and so it uses the Cyrillic alphabet that you see in like Russian and Ukrainian. The Cyrillic alphabet itself actually started from two Bulgarian priests, one by the name of Kirill, which is where Cyrillic comes from. Kirill and Metodi are the two Bulgarian priests, and that's kind of where the alphabet originated and kind of the start of the language. So you could say Bulgarian is like the mother Slavic language, where it all kind of began. Although the alphabet itself is fairly easy to get, and I know people see it and, oh, it's a different alphabet, so they immediately think it's really hard, but it's a phonetic alphabet. So once you know the sound for each letter, you can open up a book and start reading. You may have no idea what you're saying or reading, but you can read. And so the alphabet isn't too hard to get a hold of, but the language itself, at least for me, was really tricky. I don't think I'm great with languages to begin with, so it took me a while. I'd say about 6 months in country, and I could start to get by on my own. And I would say by a year, I could feel confident going into any conversation. Obviously, I mean, by the end of my mission, I still wasn't perfect, and even now, like, I'm still trying to learn and improve my Bulgarian. So I mean, it's the hardest thing about the language is learning how to speak like a Bulgarian would speak. It's easy to learn the language and be able to say, this is what I want to say in English, and then just translate it into Bulgarian, and it works. But to really speak like a Bulgarian, to say things in a way that they would say it, that's really like kind of a pretty hard thing to get down, and you just have to spend a lot of time listening to the people and listening to the way they say things and common phrases and things like that. So, and that just takes time. So be patient. If you're learning the language, you just got to be patient. I know I was really hard on myself at the beginning of my mission, struggling over the language, but just a lot of hard work, a lot of prayers, and patience, and it really does come. One thing that helped me a lot, so if this was a bit of advice, and it may not work for everyone, but reading the Book of Mormon out loud really helped me quite a bit. The way things are pronounced is a little different than in English. So it takes a while for your mouth to learn how to form the words and to sound Bulgarian-ish, you could say. So reading the Book of Mormon out loud really helped my mouth to kind of start speaking and my mind to start thinking of it, and I was hearing it, so I was starting to understand better. So reading out loud the Book of Mormon, that personally helped me a lot. I know others in my mission will say something else helped them quite a bit, but for me that helped a lot. And it really, find what works for you is what I would say, because there's lots of good ways, but always incorporate the Lord, because that's the best way to learn for sure. The music there is quite interesting. You can hear a lot of influence from like Turkey and from Greece and that kind of area. And I for the life of me, I can't sing like a Bulgarian. They do something with their voice where it's like really wavy, and it's really interesting. So I mean, folk music is pretty common, traditional type thing that's been around for a long time. So with more religious kind of holidays and events like that, weddings, you'll hear the folk music. And then on the radio, you have the modern Bulgarian pop music, which is called chalga. And again, it's interesting, and it's very Bulgarian, and there's nothing really that I could compare it to in America. And again, like I said, I don't know how to describe it other than it's got that really wavy voice, and I don't know. It's pretty interesting stuff. I mean, personally not my favorite maybe, but music is definitely very different, and you can identify it as Bulgarian if you're there. So that was pretty interesting as well. They do have mountains in the country. They're not as big as Utah mountains, but there's mountains, and they do have a little bit of skiing there, so you will see some of that. In general, it's just a pretty green country. You get a lot of same type of plants and things that you'd see in Utah, pines and other trees. One thing that's interesting, maybe this is a little bit of a side note, but there's a lot of, I think it's lilac trees in English. And you see them a little bit here, but you see them more over there, and they have little buds that you can collect, and the Bulgarians would make tea out of these little buds. So that was one interesting thing about the plants there. Herbal teas are a fairly normal thing over there, so that was one interesting thing that I saw them do with the plants over there. As far as like city layouts, as I mentioned, you'll see a lot of these communist cement block buildings, and they're quite massive, very block-like, and quite unattractive. And you'll see those all over. They built them quite like crazy during the communist time. And more current buildings follow the same model-ish, still very cement built, but they paint them and they try to make them look attractive. So newer buildings, I mean, they're of the same style, but they look a lot more nice and attractive, and so that's nice to see the newer buildings. Each city will have several Bulgarian Orthodox churches, and depending on how big the city is, they'll have quite a large cathedral or not. And then a very common thing in the large cities is what's called the Glav. And the Glav is kind of like the main street. It goes down the center of the city, and it's just like a walking path. Very open kind of center, and there's generally shops on both sides, and people just walk up and down the Glav and stop at the cafe and get drinks, and it's just kind of the very central social hub of the city. And depending on the laws of that particular city, that was quite a common place for us to attract, because it's always full of people. So you'll always see a Glav in these big cities, full of shops and restaurants and cafes and people all up and down. And that's the place to be in the center of city. So as you get away from the cities, you start getting more individual, small little homes. Again, more cement built. And then the Bulgarians aren't too big of fans of gypsies. And so the gypsies will always have their kind of area of town They're generally kind of excluded to one portion of the city, and it's generally called a makala. The makala is where the gypsies live, and it's fairly run down and not always the safest place to go. But that's a pretty standard format for a city there. One thing to remember with Bulgarian is that there's a way to talk to people who are your friends, and there's a way to talk to people that you don't really know. So if you were to visit, probably the best way would be talk in a way that you don't know someone, the more polite way. So if you're going to say hello, the most common way would be zdravete. Zdravete. And if you were to say goodbye, it'd be dovijdene. Or you can also say ciao. That works as well. A really common thing is when you greet someone to say dobar den, which means like good day. That's a common greeting. How are you? Kak ste? I'm good. Dobre sam. You're to say my name is. Kazvam se Niels Wankier, or Kazvam se whatever your name may be. If you were to ask how much does something cost, koliko struva, whatever it is, you could hold it up or point to it, or koliko struva tova would be how much does this cost. Where's the bathroom? Kade toiletnata. How you could say where am I? Kade some. Some other things. You're to say like it was nice to meet you. Priatno mi besha. Or when you greet someone, it's nice to meet you. Priatno mi je. So priatno mi besha for when you're leaving, or priatno mi je when you're first greeting someone. Nice to meet you, or it was nice to meet you. It's an absolutely beautiful country. Like I said, it's in the Balkans, so once you get outside of the kind of dirty, dingy cement cities and you get out into the countryside, the whole countryside is absolutely beautiful, really green. They're pretty big on roses are a pretty big thing. So I mean, you'll pass rose fields, and sunflower fields are actually a big thing. So you'll be driving along the highway and see these huge fields of sunflowers, and those are really pretty to see. Actual places to visit, the eastern border is on the Black Sea. So they've got quite a bit of coastal area and a lot of resorts on the east there in the Black Sea. So at least from what I hear, it's a pretty common place for Europeans to go for summer vacation, is to go to the beaches in Bulgaria. So there's that kind of area. There's a lot of Thracian ruins throughout the country. So I went to several kind of rundown villages and castle type things that were really quite neat. One in particular that I can remember, it's on the coast, the Black Sea coast, and it's this kind of castle on this like peninsula that sticks out, and there's like sheer cliffs on each side of it, and it was a big Thracian kind of castle. It was really pretty. That was one of my favorite places to go visit. There's a lot of like cathedral type things that deal with the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. A lot of really cool churches to go see that are really old and things. I personally really enjoy like the old religious history stuff, so I always really enjoyed going and seeing the old Bulgarian Orthodox churches that are all over the country. There's a pretty well-known one in the Rila Mountains called the Rila Monastery, and that one's pretty common for people to go visit. There's some interesting communist places to go see. One in particular, it's up by the Shipka Pass. It's up on this mountain, and it's this old communist building that was abandoned when communism fell, and it looks like a flying saucer on top of a mountain, and it's closed off, but you can the Bulgarians have kind of like broken in through the side, and then you can go inside and visit, and it's really quite fascinating place to look. And it really is quite a beautiful country, and a lot of people haven't heard of it. But if you did go there, like, there's lots of really neat things to see. There's also some natural, like, nature type things to see. I wasn't able to see as much of those. There's some pretty famous caves in the kind of the southern area of Bulgaria. So I mean, there's plenty to see if you go there. And a lot of people just haven't heard of Bulgaria because it's a smaller, less known country, but it really is a pretty place to be. The climate was actually pretty similar to what I was used to in Utah. Like, they've definitely got the 4 seasons. In the summer, it gets fairly warm. It'd be, in the 90s, maybe hit 100 once or twice. So, I mean, it's fairly warm in the winter or in the summer. And in the winter, it gets really cold and it snows quite a bit. It's different than Utah in that spring, summer, you get more rain than you see in Utah. So it's a pretty fertile country, you could say. But yeah, definitely a lot like Utah. I was surprised, the 4 seasons and everything. So it was pretty nice. Once you get there, I mean, it can be fairly expensive to get there. It's on the other side of the world. But once you get there, I mean, the dollar is in your favor. So your money will go a long ways, which is nice. There's a lot of public transportation there. If you're in the capital, they've got like a subway station, subway called the Metro, and that can get you a lot of places really fast. And it's, from what I hear, it's growing and expanding all the time, which is really nice. There's bus systems in every city that I mean, the buses themselves may be kind of run down, but the system works pretty well, actually. You do have to be careful, and I hate to say this, but the gypsies are known to steal from people and to pick your pocket if you're not careful. So there's a fair amount of pickpocketing. Is that the right word? Pickpocketing, kind of like the buses and whatnot. So, mind your surroundings and where you put your valuables. The countryside is beautiful, so I mean, enjoy the cities. There's some historical things to see in each city, but then travel the country, see what's out there, because it's a really beautiful country. Lots of history in the, like I said, Thracian ruins, and go up in the mountains, and there's lots of beautiful things. You just Google places to see in Bulgaria, and you'll come up with little things that people don't normally think about or talk about. So it's a really nice place. Driving is pretty similar there. You drive on the right side. You can't turn right on a red light. I do remember that, so don't try that. The police, if you're going to get pulled over, the police, they just stand on the side of the road and they stick out a little sign that says stop. They don't like follow you and turn on their lights and pull you over. They just stick out their lollipop, is what we called it, and then you're supposed to pull over. So if you see that, that means you're getting pulled over. But other than that, like, it's a great country. Obviously, I mean, if you don't know Bulgarian, it'll be a little difficult to get around, but especially the younger crowd, they're starting to learn English more so. So I mean, you can get by, and people are pretty nice and helpful, and they'll help you get where you need to go or see what you need to see. So one kind of like fun thing about my mission is, at least when I was there, my mission president, he did a musical group every year. And so when I had been in country about 3 months, he organized a music group. It was the second time that they had done it. They did that the year before. And the purpose was because we were just about to get the new green hymn book. Before that, we only had about 30 hymns, and we knew the green hymn book was coming within a few months, and we had kind of early copies of it. And so we were going to tour the mission and sing some of these new hymns, and we sang some fun hymns, and that was just a really fun memory from my mission. I got to see the entire country, to go to every city, to sing for members and just people off the street. Every city that we would go to, we'd advertise, for hours beforehand, handing out little flyers, come hear us sing and come find out what Mormons are about. And then we'd have our concerts in the evening. So that was kind of a fun thing. We cut a CD, and so I have a CD out that I'm quite proud of. That was just kind of a fun little thing that I did on my mission. It was really fun to go around to all the cities and sing and meet people, and I really enjoyed that. I don't know how real this is or if this is accurate, but you honestly don't see a lot of animals over there. And from what I was kind of told is that during the communist time, they tended to kill off the animals, and I don't exactly know the reason. So you rarely would see any animals. I saw one deer once when I was hiking up in some mountains in one of the areas I served. And I do know that there's a decent amount of like boar hunting, wild boars. That's kind of one of the bigger things that people hunt for there. The gypsies, they used to, back in the 90s, I believe, they used to train bears and have performing bears with them, but that was outlawed by the time I got to Bulgaria. So I did see a bear once in a cage in a random park, which is kind of strange. But from what I hear, there are a little bit of black bears in the area as well. But in all honesty, you really don't see animals too much. And like I said, I don't know how accurate that thing is about, during the communist era, them killing off animals, but that was the reason I was told that you don't see a lot of animals. I broke my foot twice, and so I spent 5 months of my mission on crutches, and that was quite interesting, tracting and going around on crutches. And I got really good at my crutches, and I could walk around on them or jump and do different little tricks on them. But it was hard, obviously. It wasn't a great thing, but it turned out to be a blessing. The second time I broke it, they determined I had to have surgery, and healthcare in Bulgaria is not very good. And so I actually ended up flying to Germany and spent a month in Germany and had surgery there. So that was quite interesting. I guess one kind of fun story talking about healthcare is, as I mentioned, the healthcare system is not great out there. And there was some interesting methods of handling certain things. The hospitals are kind of run down. The clinics are questionable, possibly, but you can find good healthcare in the capital and whatnot. I remember in particular, I had a companion who started getting a rash on his body, and so we asked a member in the city that we were at, like, where would you go to get medical attention? And so she came and met us and took us to a little clinic, and it's just basically there's one room and you kind of line up outside of it and just go one at a time, and the doctor inside takes care of you. So we went, and the first time was all right, and the doctor prescribed something and told us to come back in a week to see if it was improving. So we got the medicine, and he actually was doing much better with the medicine. The rash was going away. But the second time we went, same thing, you kind of line up and wait your turn to go in the room. And there was a lady that went in the room right before us, kind of a younger lady, probably around 30. And she was in there for a little while, and then they called us in. And my thought was, well, the lady didn't come out. Like, so what's going on? So we walk in, and there's a lady with her pants down, and they're giving her a shot. And we're like, oh no. So just kind of strange stuff like that. The culture is, they're not very, privacy isn't a big deal to them, and they're just kind of open about things. So I don't know, just weird stuff like that. I don't know. It's an interesting country with lots of little quirks about their culture and things like that. My mission is definitely something I think about basically every day. I look back and I realize that it had more effect on me than anything previous in my life. My mission, it gave me a vision of who God saw me as and the potential that I had inside me as a son of God. I just know from my heart and from my experience that as you go on a mission, as you really turn your life over to God, as you're obedient, obedience is huge, and as you work hard, the Lord is able to just mold you and make so much more out of you. I came home from my mission with a vision of who Niels Wankier could be, of who God saw me as, and what I could do for this world. And it changed my life more than anything. As you really are obedient to missionary work, to the way it's been asked us to do by the Lord, you come to love the people so much. I mean, I have such love for the people in Bulgaria. I can't wait to go back there and to visit them. I'm so grateful for things like Skype, that I can talk to Bulgarians, people from across the world, and still talk with them and share my life with them. As you serve them and you give selflessly of your time and your heart to them, you build such a love for these people. And even on days when it's hard, which happens maybe quite a bit, you still are excited to go to work. You're still excited to serve these people. You're excited to go to church on Sundays and see the members that you care so much about. So I would just bear a testimony. I would share my heart that the Lord is in this work, that it's His work. And so when we do it in His way, when we're obedient to the mission rules, when we're working hard, when we're just serving selflessly, great blessings will come to your life. It'll come to the lives of the people you teach. It'll come to you personally. It'll come to you in your companionship. It'll come to you in your relationship with God. I have testimony of that. I bear witness of it. It's so true. Just put your shoulder to the wheel. Give yourself up to the Lord, and He will do so much more with you than you ever thought possible. My testimony is firm. My knowledge is sure. The Lord lives. He loves us. He loves all of His children. The ones in Bulgaria, the ones in America, the ones everywhere in the world. He loves them so much. And it's such a joy and a pleasure to be able to serve a small portion of them. And for me to serve the people in Bulgaria, and hopefully to continue to serve them my entire life. The Lord loves them. He loves you. And His work is true. The Book of Mormon has the power to change lives, and slowly it's doing that in Bulgaria. And I saw that on my mission, and I saw it in myself, and I saw it with people that I interacted with there. The gospel of Jesus Christ brings such hope, and Bulgaria is a country that can use that hope. It's a country that needs that light, and I bear testimony of that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
First of all, it's a long ways away. So we went to the Missionary Training Center in Provo, which meant getting there, you're flying and whatnot for almost a solid day. It's 24 hours of travel. So when you get there, you're tired, you're kind of confused. I'm surprised we even made it at all. Like we were just like deer in the headlights. Everyone's like, well, what plane did we get on? Like, where are we? So you get there. Obviously the arrival was really pretty cool. I mean, in some countries, especially like Bulgaria, there's no jetway. The plane lands and you're flying this thing that looks like a 1960s bus with like shaggy carpet, like drapes and stuff on the plane. You're just like, where am I? And we get off the plane. It's raining and kind of like gray and dark, and you've got all the Cyrillic, Russian, Bulgarian writing everywhere, and it just hits you. You're like, I am on another planet. Like, this is really cool. And the mission president's there, and the elders, and everything's so new. You're like, I don't remember people's names. I don't know what's going on. They take you to the mission home, and like you have this awesome meal, and you're so you just don't know. Like, you're excited, but you're like not really sure what for. And so then you get a chance to sleep and try to figure things out, get your bearings. You meet your companion, and you're like, well, I hope he knows what he's doing. I hope he's cool, or she, if it's a sister. And one of the things we did, which is, I don't know if they do this at every mission, but we started doing is like the missionaries, you would arrive and you just drop your bags off and you just go proselyte with somebody before you even sit down, before you do anything. Like, it's actually kind of like crazy. You're like tired and you're like, what am I doing? Like, before you know it, you're like sitting in someone's home, like trying to teach them the gospel, and it's like this flashback to, the training experiences they have in the MTC, where you're like trying to like teach them and you're like, I don't understand anything they're saying, like anything. But yeah, I don't know. That's pretty fun. The first week's always fun. I mean, my first week was probably different than most people's. There was a bit of a transition going on, and it's something that taught me a huge lesson. I mean, when I arrived there, everybody would say, oh, this is a very difficult mission. No one baptizes, blah, blah, blah. The whole, get ready for difficult times. And what I realized, obviously you don't know much, but what I realized during that first probably 3 to 4 months is that success really comes to those who make it happen. And a lot of that is contingent on obedience and work. And so if you're not working, whether you're tired or you don't believe you'll succeed, so you're like, well, we're not going to succeed anyways, why bother working? Let's take it easy. Or, the obedience factor, it's part of how it is. Like, it's why the military is so strict. It's why great organizations that succeed have very detailed maps to success. When when you pull it up, like, if you're going to get from where you are to where you want to be, you're going to have to do the work in between those two. And so when I first arrived, I mean, man, it was pretty intense. I mean, some of the missionaries were getting attacked and all this stuff. And so initially I had thought that maybe that was just the country. It's like, oh, it's a culture. They're very, this, or they're very that. But what I realized is that it had very little to do with the country and a lot more to do with how intensely the missionaries worked. And I don't know, it was interesting because that first week, you get in there and it's just like, you expect the same thing. You expect to show up with a bunch of missionaries and everybody's going to be awesome and they're all going to be like gung-ho and excited. And then you get there and they're just people, doing their best. And so I don't know, that was pretty exciting. Okay, so the hardest thing to learn about Bulgaria is that the head nod is reversed. So this is yes and this is no. This is no, and if you click, that's also no. And if you combine multiple clicks, that becomes offensive. So if someone's like, it's kind of like, really kind of a mean thing to do. The other thing that's really surprising is that the language allows you to build negatives. So like in English, you can't do that. Negatives cancel each other. If I don't have nothing, that means I have something. But in their language, that means I really, really have nothing. So you build on it. So it confuses you to death. I mean, people will say these things that are like 10 negatives in a sentence, and then they're just nodding the whole time, and you're just like, and so like when I was coming home, I was on the plane, and after 2 years of doing that, you get used to it. And the stewardess like, would you like some coffee? And I'm like, no. She's like, okay. And I'm like, do you have any hot chocolate? And she's like, yeah, we have hot chocolate. Do you like some of that? I'm like, sure, that'd be great. And it's just like, okay, I'm gonna go get your hot chocolate. And I'm like, why is she? And I get home and I go to school, and the teachers are like, does everybody understand? And I'm like, Mr. Are you okay? Do you get it? I'm like, no, I totally get it. Absolutely. Oh, sorry. Yes, I get it. Like it'll mess you up for a while because you'll ask people like, do you believe this? And they're like, uh-huh. It's like, oh, got it. So in Bulgaria, they have a structure for how names flow. And what it means is basically, if you're someone's son, you take their name plus an extension, like, Han's son, You know what I mean? Like Jen's son, that kind of a thing that comes from like Scandinavia. Or like in England, they would do it by profession, like if you're a smith or a packer or whatever. So in Bulgaria, there's basically like 10 names, and everybody has all the same names. It's like Svetlana, Gorgieva, Gorgiev. You know, it's like their dad's name is George, or Dmitri, and so their last name is Dimitrov. So it's like, essentially every single person in the country has like one of 6 names. It's awesome. It's kind of confusing at times. You're like, well, yeah, we have 4 Georges and 6 Dimitris that are investigators. I'm just like, well, which one? It's like, well, we'll give them numbers, like Gorgiev 1 and Romanov 2. So for a long time, obviously these people, to give you like a context, most of Bulgaria was like farming villages, very small, and then after they call it the ropesful, the Turkish ropesful. It's basically when they were part of the Ottoman Empire, they were enslaved, and they brought them into the empire, and for all this time, these little villages and everything, and they finally like get free of that for a brief moment after World War I, and they're like, we're back to the Kingdom of Bulgaria, we're free. And then World War II happens, communism happens. A cool fact about Bulgaria, they have this beautiful monument that the nation of Israel gave them, because during World War II, they're one of the few countries that actually refused to export the Jews from the country. They put them on a train, they drove them in a circle around the country for 9 or 10 months until the war ended. Super cool. But anyways, so when the communists came in, they're like, this country's all spread out. I mean, these people are everywhere. They're in the hills. It's way too hard to keep tabs on them. So they grabbed everybody and forced them to move into, the future industrial cities. And so it's so crazy to get there, because you'll go to a city that's got, 15, 20, 30,000 people living in the density of say, like, one of the boroughs of New York. And then outside the city is nothing. I mean, you get to the edge of a 15-story building, and then it's just flat farmland for miles and miles. And the city is totally dirty, and everything outside of there is beautiful. So you have these people that have been living in these drafty, like really poorly built buildings for their whole life. And so they have developed this fear of, drafts and cold and different things. And so that's one of the things that'll shock you. Like, if you're sitting on like the ground, like cold cement, they'll come make you get up. They'll be like, what are you doing? Like, and they have this saying, you'll freeze your ovaries. It's kind of silly, but basically they have this fear because, if you got sick during the communist days, there was no options. It was all socialized medicine. So it basically was like, you're going to have serious problems if you ever get sick. So, I mean, you'll be on a tram or on a bus, and if you open the window, I mean, everyone will yell at you, shut the window, well, I'll get sick, and it's 120 degrees, smells horrible inside, you're just dying, you're like, please open the window, and you can't do it, and won't let you. So some of those cultural things are kind of interesting. The language, it's difficult, for sure. Like, you'll just be stumped for a long time. And the group that I was with, we studied. It was one of the last groups that still had discussions to memorize. And no group had ever done more than 2 discussions ever. And 4 people in my group learned all 6 of them. So obviously I felt like a total retard, because I'm like, why am I not learning these faster? Because these guys are like linguistic geniuses. And it was perfect because they just barely reopened Serbia for missionaries. And so some of them, those that caught on really quick, went over to Serbia. But all the same, I mean, it's a very cool language. It's very hard. Like, it's a consonant-based language. So it doesn't blend that well. Like English, you speak and the words run into each other. It kind of has, it's not a total melodic kind of flow, but on that scale, I'd say, the beautiful Romance languages are over here, and English is somewhere in the middle, and you got like German, and then Bulgarian's like really hard, like because you're like, oh my gosh, like everyone is so angry, like, because the language sounds harsh. It's very just consonant based, just staccato, I guess the best And then, as you learn a little bit, you start to learn that, oh, that's not really the case. Like they're not, they're just talking to each other. And then once you get fluent, you realize, no, you were right. Everyone is angry, but that's just their culture. They just like to be that way. So they've got some awesome things that you can just look forward to. They have a breakfast pastry called banitsa, which is like layers of pastry and cheese. They have two kinds of cheeses in Bulgaria. They have the white cheese and the yellow cheese. So one is called kashkaval, which is the yellow cheese. It's kind of like a dry, waxy cheddar. And then the other one is called sirene, which is white, kind of crumbly feta cheese. It's funny, they keep it in the fridge on a dish with water and a little bit of salt to keep it fresh. I don't know. Those are pretty good. So they put the sirene in this banitsa. That's fantastic. During Halloween in the fall time, they all put like pumpkin in it, and that's really good as well. They have a potato dish called moussaka, which is excellent. Let's see what else they have that's good. I'm trying to go over the good things first. At least something to look forward to. They'll do baklava, like the Greek dish, really good. They'll have a salad called shopska salata, which is like cucumber salad. It's not so bad. They do drink a lot of yogurt. They'll talk about it, kislo miliako, which is like a sour milk. Now they do have a breakfast drink called boza, which is like green fermented grains or something. Don't drink it. It's so bad. I've never been able to swallow. I tried so many times to drink it, and it would make me gag. They have another thing that's like a fluorescent purple drink. It's basically boiled concentrated cabbage juice. You'll get it once in a while. They use it to wake up after they've had a hangover or something. People offer it to you. It's vicious. Like, get ready. It'll rock your world if you drink it. Sometimes they'll mix that with, or the yogurt, the kislo miliako, they'll mix that with water during the summer. So they have kind of a weird thing. Hot goes with hot, cold goes with cold. So you can buy ice cream in the winter, and you get hot drinks in the summer. And if you ask for ice in your drink, they'll think you're an idiot. They're like, you are insane. Like, what? If you drink something cold during the summer, you're going to get sick, according to tradition and culture. And during the winter, if you drink hot chocolate, you'll probably die. So that's kind of a weird thing. That's like a cultural moray. Right before I went on my mission, they had, the terrorist attacks and September 11th and all that. So we had some pretty serious issues with the Iraq War and with, some of the anti-American sentiment going on in Greece and those areas. So we actually, for most of the mission, pretty much, I'd say all but maybe conferences, we didn't wear name tags. We very seldom wore suit coats. A lot of times, they would have us buy, like local clothes. Like I always had like local coats and things, it's because the coats you see in America, or like the classic missionary coats, those black long raincoats, they look very like CIA or mafia-esque. I mean, it's too clean, it's too nice. You're in an entire country that's incredibly impoverished, and you're walking around in like a sharp, nice suit with a nice black overcoat, and people would be intimidated, they'd be afraid of you, they'd think that you were they're spying. And so we would just, that's what the mission encouraged. We would just wear local clothes the whole time and blend right in. And then that way people felt really comfortable with you. As far as like the weather goes, the first winter I was there was the worst winter they'd had in like 100 years. So, 8-9 foot snow drifts. It was crazy. Our power went out one day, and we didn't have power for like probably 2 weeks. So we had like ice on the inside of our windows. They hadn't turned the hot water on yet. So a lot of the cities, they have a central power plant that uses steam power to generate electricity, and that hot water gets shipped out to the rest of the city. So it's called Parno, but essentially they turn it on at some point during the winter because it takes a lot more effort, obviously, to generate hot water that's not going to stay within their system if it's going to get piped out to apartments and houses for people to shower with and use and heat obviously all the buildings in. That costs money, and they don't run things very efficiently there. There's a lot of corruption, so they don't turn it on for a while. So that's one of the things that's crazy during the winter. Like, if you're in a building that has porno, like you can expect some pretty cold nights until it gets kicked on. And then after it does, a lot of people can't afford high water bills, so nobody wants to be the first one to turn on the water. Because if you turn it on, you get all of the years worth of rust and buildup and everything that's in the pipes. So I have some delightful pictures of just like almost black water coming out of, the shower head and out of the sink and stuff. Because we're like, it's like $10 worth of water. We're like, dude, $10 extra, or like hot showers, like turn that on, let's do this. So, I mean, it started black, and then it eventually looked like orange juice for a while, and then it kind of got clearer. I don't know. But yeah, that winter was bad. But in general, it's not that bad. I mean, like the following winter wasn't bad at all. I mean, they're on the same level as Utah. They're right next to the Mediterranean, which usually that helps moderate the climate because you've got such big masses of water. So that'll keep it from getting bad. But they do have a lot of gray days. I mean, the sun goes down in November and it comes back up in like April. And so you can see it in people. There's a lot of like that kind of, like, I wouldn't say hopelessness, but it's a little bit of, it's like this, the winter mores, like people kind of get down a little bit because it's just gray all the time. It's just gray. So Serbia is part of the original Yugoslavia. So Serbia was comprised of Serbia, Montenegro, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Macedonia. So it used to be called Yugoslavia, and it was under the dictator Tetovo. But so Serbia was divided up in what they call the Balkanization. So it was an effort to give every ethnic group a piece of land. And it's weird because their history goes so far back. I mean, you look at maps, and every country has a map of their country when it was at its height. And that's what they believe they deserve. So you look at maps of Bulgaria, they have current maps, but most maps will have an outline of how big it used to be and the names of cities that were once theirs. And they fully believe that at some point, at some period in the future, that they will recapture their former glory. So that they'll go back into Greece and Turkey and take back the countries and the cities and stuff that used to be under their control. But they divided everything up in that region to stem the violence. I mean, the whole area was incredibly violent. And so, obviously Serbia is still a country. And now the last few years, they've done some experiments with partnering with some of their previous sections, like Serbia, Montenegro became a country of two countries, if that makes any sense. Kind of like the United Kingdom has Ireland, Scotland, Great Britain and Wales. Even though Ireland's its own country, Scotland's its own country, England's its own country, but together they're the United Kingdom, if that makes any sense. So, but yeah, it was very interesting because they couldn't take missionaries from Croatia, even though they spoke much better Serbian, because Croatian and Serbian are very similar. And if you speak Croatian in Serbia, you will, I don't know, probably get attacked. I mean, they had some pretty serious wars. They have some really bad, history between the two countries. In fact, we actually were coming in because we had shipped Book of Mormons there on a pallet in like 1995 or something, and they're still in customs to this day. They'll never release them. So the way we got Book of Mormons into the country is we drove them in every time we visited. We put them in the back of our van and drive them in. And there was a very famous member of the church named Krasimir Ćosić, who is a Croatian, played basketball for BYU. He's I think he's in the NCAA Hall of Fame, national hero. Serbia, being a basketball star is a huge deal. They play basketball in Serbia. It's weird. I mean, everywhere else it's soccer, football, but in Serbia they're tall, beautiful people. So it's really like a shock when you leave like short, dark, very like Middle Eastern. And you cross the border from Bulgaria to Serbia, and it's just like tall. It's almost like Scandinavian looking people, and you're just like, this, it doesn't make as much sense. But he paid for the Book of Mormon to be translated into Serbo-Croatian at the time, and a bunch of other books. I mean, this guy was like a national superstar, and he was, all those things. So we have it, not in Serbian, but we had it in the other language. So we bring it in because they can read it. I mean, it's like just different dialects of basically the same language, but they have such bad blood that, when you get to the border, if they found the books, they would always be like, what the heck is this? Like, it's a book. They're like, well, it's in Croatian. I'm like, well, yeah, I haven't translated to Serbian yet. And they're like, well, I don't know if I'm going to let these through. And so we'd have interesting standoffs, when we go to the border to take missionaries in and whatnot.
So when I got my mission call, it said I would serve in the Bulgaria Sofia mission, and I didn't know too much about Bulgaria, but I looked at the language and it said Turkish, and that made me think, are there any Turkish people at all in Bulgaria? And as I looked through my mission packet, I looked through the map of the mission, and I noticed that it was zoomed in on Turkey, and so that's when I realized I was probably going to serve in Turkey. And I asked around about it, and I realized that missionaries had just recently been called to Turkey because they were serving in Bulgaria, but then they pulled 4 missionaries out and then had them go to Istanbul. So yeah, talk about a crazy transfer there, but it was interesting. So yeah, I didn't know it at first, but as soon as I got to the missionary training center, they told me that I was serving in Turkey, and that's when I knew for sure that I was serving there, because it's not its own mission yet. Maybe someday. Yeah, the first day of the MTC, it was super nice because I wasn't sure who was going to teach me, if there was going to be any kind of teacher there. It felt good as soon as I stepped in there because I knew that that's where the Lord needed me to be. I felt the Spirit so strongly. When we first got in the classroom, though, the teacher just spoke in Turkish the whole time. And I was trying to pick it up, but it just felt a little overwhelming at first just because I didn't know any Turkish. I knew a couple words because I looked up on Google Translate beforehand, but that's about it. And it was an interesting experience, but as time passed on, I just felt more and more comfortable with the language. So so that was a good experience. My first day in Turkey was definitely a memorable one. When I first got there, we were greeted by the branch president, our mission president was there, and the senior couples were there as well. And it just felt really good. It felt right that I was in the right place. When I first started talking to the people, it was a good experience because I was surprised by so helpful and so kind, how kind they were. And I knew that the Lord wanted me there. I just immediately developed this love for the Turkish people. And we had some of our first Turkish food, and we had this delicious soup, and it was good. So that was the first of the many good things that we had there. It was a bit difficult because when we got there, we were the only missionaries there. We didn't have a trainer, and so we had to learn Turkish by ourselves. And we learned in the MTC, but it was definitely different in the mission field because you just have a lot more of an immersive environment and more words that you don't know. So it was difficult at first. We didn't really know the city all that well. We didn't know how to get around all that much except for the advice that the branch president gave us. And so we spent that first week just traveling around Istanbul. It's a pretty big city, around 80 million people, and it's split up between this strait, and there's the Asian side and the European side. And we had 2 missionaries that were on the European side and 2 on the Asian side. And we were assigned to the Asian side, which was less of a city, but it was a bit quieter. It just had a different feel to it. And so we had to navigate that area and find places where we could find and talk to people. And the finding that we did was restrictive. It wasn't like a normal proselyting mission, but we were still able to find people. And that was our first week, was just getting to know the people, getting to know our bearings, how to move around the place. And it was challenging, but it was very eye-opening, and we learned quite a bit just because it was just us by ourselves then. So it was like a really good. Yeah, my companion was. We went to the mission. Sorry, we went to Turkey at the same time, and so he had just as much experience as I had, which was just the missionary training center. We were in New York for a little bit, for 2 months, just so that we could get some experience, because it wasn't a matter of visas. It was just that they didn't want to send 4 missionaries out to Turkey with very little experience. So we were able to have a trainer in New York, and that was nice. And we learned how missionaries' work was supposed to go. But it was a bit different in Turkey, so that's kind of how it was a bit challenging, just because we were new there and we had to figure out how to do things. But it all worked out at the end. The Lord helped us quite a bit. When we first got there, there really were no mission boundaries. All we had was the whole city of Istanbul, and that was pretty big. If we wanted to get outside those boundaries, it would be really difficult, just because it's such a big city. As more missionaries came, we noticed that sometimes we would go to the same places and take the same routes, just because of the limitations that we had when we were finding people. So what we did was the mission president assigned us to make our own boundaries for the mission. And so what we did was we looked at the map and we prayed over it. And when it came the time to make those boundaries, we were able to easily make it, and it just came to us. And so what we did at first was we separated it, that the missionaries that would be serving on the Asian side would stay there, and the missionaries that would be on the European side would stay over there as well. When more missionaries came, we had to divide those areas up into 2 as well, because at first we had 2 companionships in Europe, and then one would be on the Asian side, just because in Europe there were more people, and it was closer to the church, and it just made more sense to have more missionaries there. On the Asian side, having one companionship was perfect there, because there were less people over there on that side, but it just made more sense that way. And so that's how we did the companionships. That's how we split up the boundaries with that. So the city of Istanbul is actually split between 2 continents, of Europe and Asia, and so it really is kind of the center of our world there. So if I understand correctly, that's one of the only cities that are like that. So it's pretty cool. So in Istanbul, there's a branch, and there's one in Ankara as well. And so those are the 2 main functioning branches right now. And it is pretty young there. We don't have too many members there, but the members that we have there are super faithful. It's just like the beginning of the church, where it was just Joseph Smith, and then at first there were so many faithful people that came, because not only did they recognize the truth, but they understood it, they followed it, and they became these great people to help serve the church. And so we even have a Turkish branch president in Istanbul, and that's really huge. And his life has definitely been guided by the Lord, and you can tell that he's definitely there because the Lord wants him, and he's the right man for the job. So we're really happy that we have a native Turk as one of the church leaders. So as far as cultural do's and don'ts there, one thing that they don't like is they don't like seeing the bottom of your foot. And so if you were to like lift up your leg and just put it off to the side, they don't like to see that part. And so that can be considered offensive to them. And so that's something that you definitely don't do there. If you want to hear something repeated, and you say, like, someone says a sentence to you in Turkish and you don't understand it, you don't say what, so you don't say the Turkish word up ne, but you say, like, excuse me, like efendim or affedersiniz, or bunu tekrar söyleyebilir misin, or you say, like, you say something like that. So just saying, like, what, the word like what can be kind of offensive. It can be kind of like strong, so you don't say something like that. And that's something that we learned pretty quickly, just by the reaction of saying that when we didn't understand something, which was quite a bit in the beginning. But there's some other things too, such as they absolutely love cats. I'm not too sure why, but they just love them. I think cats are cool, but you just see them around the city sometimes, and even grown men, you can see them carrying some bags of cat food and just feeding them out on the streets and just petting them and stuff like that. So they like cats quite a bit. What they also like is when you are genuine and friendly, because they're super friendly people. And they can notice that. If you're just trying to use them for something, they can easily detect that. But if you're nice and you want to help them or be their friend, then they'll be one of your greatest friends that you'll ever have. Sometimes you can just talk to someone for about 5 or 10 minutes, and just like that, you can instantly be best friends. Sometimes when we would talk to people, there would be other Turkish people that would talk to each other as well. They'd say things like, these Americans have pretty good Turkish, or wow, this is really cool. And so even they would start being friends with each other. Like if we would talk to two different people, those two Turks would start talking to each other as well and get each other's number, and it's just a very friendly environment. So as long as you're friendly and in Turkey, you'll be treated very well, and you'll make a lot of good friends there. They're pretty accepting of strangers coming up and talking to them. As long as you go about it the right way, it doesn't seem really weird to them. At first they might be shocked because they see a foreigner speaking Turkish, but after they get over that fact, the conversation goes pretty well, and so they don't seem too taken aback when you start talking to them randomly, but it's something they like. They like sometimes people will go up and talk to you as well, and they're very kind of talkative people, and they enjoy having conversations and talking about things like football and other world news and things like that. So it wasn't too difficult. As far as table manners go, there's this one thing that they like to do is they like to have soup with their meals, and when you're done eating your soup, what they like to do is like get pieces of bread and get all the residue off by soaking the bread in the residue soup and just leaving the bowl clean. And that's like a sign of kindness, and I can see why, because that has to make it easier for the wife to clean the bowl afterward. But it's just something that they like to do culturally, and so yeah, I'd say that's something that is specific to Turkey as far as table manners go. So we lived in an apartment, and the apartments there were pretty nice. And once more missionaries came, we were able to pick out certain apartments, and then they would be inspected by either the mission president or someone that he would choose to do so. And so we lived, so the apartments were nice. So we didn't have a car there, and we didn't ride bikes there. So we walked around, and we also used public transportation. And the public transportation system in Turkey is super nice. Well, at least, the public transportation system in Istanbul is really nice. And they would have many different things, such as metros. At one time, they had a train that you could use. They would have these buses that you could use as well that went through different parts of the city. They had this really cool underground metro, and they just kept expanding that while we were there. There was also a metro that went underwater, that went from the European side to the Asian side and then back, and that was pretty cool too. We were able to go on boats, like ferry boats called vapurs, and that was a good way of getting from one side of the city to the other. And they also had these really cool buses called minibuses, and that's what they call it. They call it minibus, or minibusler for a plural. And they were cool because you would pay the guy, and you would tell him where to go. So it was kind of like a taxi, but they would have these specific routes, and depending on how long you were on the minibus, depended on how much you paid. And so they were usually cheaper than taxis, depending on where you wanted to go. And the drivers got from point A to point B really quickly, and it was just a fast and efficient way. They were super fun, and that was just one way that we got around. And so the public transportation system was really nice, and it was really efficient, so it was enjoyable to use that. It is pretty safe. I definitely felt safer in Istanbul than I did in New York, so it just because they're good people. And of course, there are some places that might not have been as safe as others, but it was definitely safe for the most part. I didn't feel in danger at all, and even if some people knew that we were affiliated with our religion, they're very tolerant. I mean, people would listen to us, and if they didn't like what we were doing, they just said, I'm not interested in hearing about this, but I appreciate what you're doing because religion is important, and they were very respectful about that. The weather was super nice. I was surprised by how similar it was to Virginia, because that's where I was from. It was definitely a bit more humid though. just because it's surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea, and you get there's just a lot of water there, and so you get that humidity. It had all 4 seasons, and so it would be pretty cold in the winters. It even snowed there a few times, and that was interesting. And you wouldn't think that for Turkey, but it did. The springs there, spring and fall there was super beautiful. It was like the perfect temperature. Summers got pretty hot, but even then, it was pretty nice just because there's water everywhere, and if you want to get like any kind of water or quick snack, there would be these street vendors, and you could get water for really cheap, just a thing of bottled water. Also at those street vendors, they would sell these famous Turkish bagels called simits, and it's pretty much like it's like a bagel, but it's covered in sesame seeds, and it doesn't really taste like one, but it has its own little unique taste to it, and it's really good because you can have that plain, or sometimes you could have it with white cheese and tomatoes, or put some Nutella on it and just heat it up, and it's really good. So I guess that was another food tangent, but that's also like something that's really popular in Turkey, so I guess you could put that in the food part, but yeah. If you ask someone what they did, you would get the answer like, I'm a lawyer, I'm an engineer, I do real estate, I do things with banks. So it's pretty varied. Pretty much anything that you can think of here is in Turkey, but those are some of the more common ones. And there are a bunch of people that worked in the textile industry as well, but it wasn't, from the responses that we got in Istanbul, it wasn't the most common response that we got, but there were still quite a bit of people that did it. So in Istanbul, there's mainly Turkish people. You get people from all around the world because the textile industry in Turkey is pretty big, and there's a lot of opportunity for jobs there. So you have people from Africa, you have people from the Philippines, and pretty much anywhere. But it's mainly just Turkish people. Its demographics aren't too varied, but at the same time, you can see people from all around the world just because Istanbul is a pretty visited city, whether it's through tourists or people that want to live there for a bit because it has a good place to, well, Turkey is just a good place, especially in Istanbul, to teach English because there are so many people that want to learn English, and so it's just a really good place to teach that kind of thing. And the people themselves, like I've said before, they're super nice. I was so surprised by how kind they were. They're super Christ-like, even though Christ wasn't at the center of their lives. They revere Christ as a prophet and someone who's super important, but they don't necessarily follow his gospel as we know it. But despite that, they're super nice, and they have so many Christ-like attributes. So when teaching about Christ, it was super easy because they were able to relate to him quite a bit, especially with like charity and service. They're just a loving people, and they can be kind of mischievous as well. They love jokes. They love having a good time. They love soccer, or football as they call it over there. And we had this one person that we taught, and he wanted to learn more about what we believed. And he wanted to ask his dad if it was okay if he was taught by us. And he came back and told us that his dad said, you know what, it's okay. You can learn about this religion. You can even change it if you want, but you cannot change your favorite soccer team or your favorite football team. And that was pretty funny just because football there is something that is super, they get super passionate about it, and it's something that's unified. And so when you get there, you have to choose your favorite team. There's 3 main teams there. There's Galatasaray, there's Fenerbahce, and there's also Beşiktaş. And those are the 3 main ones in Istanbul. So the demographics of Muslims there it's 98 to 99% Muslim from what I can remember. So the number is pretty high. The European side was more of like the city, and on the Asian side, there were malls and things like that, but it wasn't as much as a city life as it wasn't as much of a city as Europe was. So there wasn't too big of a cultural difference, but it just had a different feel to it just because of the way that it was laid out and the people there. There weren't too many crazy foods in in Istanbul, or I guess in Turkey, just because it was super good. But they did have this one thing called kokoreç, and what it is it's stuffed sheep intestines, and I could never get around to eating that. I could never eat that just because, I don't know, it didn't seem too appealing. But there are definitely really good things out there. I guess one weird thing that I had was just sheep liver, and that tasted pretty good actually. At first, it tasted different just because it's liver, but that's probably the craziest thing that I had there. But for the most part, the food is pretty normal. So we definitely had a lot of language blunders, but the word for like sister and girlfriend is pretty similar because the word for sister is kız kardeş, and the word for girlfriend is kız arkadaş. And so sometimes we would show pictures of our family and be like, this is my mom and this is my brother. And sometimes I would say, this is my girlfriend. Like, oh, wait, no, it's my sister. Like, I'm not with her or anything like that. And so there's just some things like that. There are two big things I learned while in Turkey. One was about the atonement of Jesus Christ and the role that it had on me as a missionary and as the investigators that we had, because as I learned more about the atonement of Jesus Christ and studied about it, I just gained a greater appreciation for it. I remember reading on my mission, Alma chapter 7, verses 11 through 13, and that's probably my favorite description about the atonement in any kind of scripture, just because when I realized that it wasn't just for our sins that Jesus Christ died for, but for all of our afflictions, our infirmities, all of our weaknesses, that he knows every single bit of that. That was something that I learned, and it still benefits me to this day, because a mission really does have a way of exposing your weaknesses, and it's difficult. It's not easy to get up every day and have the greatest outlook, just because it's hard to teach the gospel in a Muslim country. But once you got out there and started doing it, you felt this amazing spirit within you, and you felt the atonement of Jesus Christ in your life, and it was worth it. That no matter how difficult it was fun, it was fulfilling, and you were able to make a good change in the lives of others. Another one that I would say is about charity. And Morona chapter 7, verses 45 through 48 really spoke to me during this time, because if I wanted to be a good missionary, I needed to love the Turkish people. And to be quite honest, it was very easy to love them, but I needed to develop a greater love for them, which is the pure love of Christ. And as soon as I started praying for charity every day and striving to have those feelings in my heart, the work just came much easier, whether it was things about doctrine or the language. Charity really made a difference, and it's something that I'm still working on today, but I've learned the importance of that in my mission, and it's a good lesson that I learned. Probably the best skill that I gained was just going up to random people and talking with them. Before my mission, I worked at Chick-fil-A, and that you talked to a lot of people and had conversations with them. But when I was in Turkey, that's something that I learned to do even more, and that being able to just talk to random people like that on the street, it was difficult at first, because you had thoughts were like, well, I don't really want to bother them, or like my Turkish is bad, so they'll probably make fun of me. But I just overcame those doubts that I had in my mind and just started talking to them, and so it's been a skill that's helped me even to this day. As far as weather goes, I was surprised to know that it snowed there. It's kind of cool just being able to see a mosque and just see snow on it, because you think that, there would be in like desert areas, but they're really all around the world, and it's just seeing the snow there was different, because I really didn't expect that, didn't really expect it to be that cold over there. Be sure that that you get in the habit of reading your scriptures and praying every day and going to church. It seems like the basic answers for that, but it's what you do quite a bit for those 2 years straight, and something that we should all be doing in our lives. What I would also recommend is learning about the Spirit and how to recognize it, because without the Spirit, you can't do any kind of missionary work. Without the Spirit, you can't teach, And you won't be able to live up to your potential unless you're able to recognize the Spirit and know how to invite the Spirit in your life. Once you have that done, then the hardest part is over, and the Spirit will guide you because you're not alone in this work. For returned missionaries, just keep getting back in the habit. When I first got home, I made sure that I guess I'll restart that. Just make sure that you keep the same good habits that you've had in your life, such as reading the scriptures and praying and going to church and things like that. I'd also recommend that try to get on a schedule as quick as possible, because when I first got home, I enjoyed spending time with my family, but there's this huge gap of time. There's this void of things that I didn't, there's just this big void of time, and I didn't know what to do with all that time. But a couple of days when I got home from a mission, I started working, and as soon as I got back on a schedule, it felt much better. It felt that I felt like I was using my time more wisely. So for the missionaries that are called to Turkey, be prepared for such an amazing experience, because your time in Turkey will teach you quite a bit about the gospel of Jesus Christ and the atonement. You're going to have to know the gospel very well, because you're going to be questioned about everything, about the Book of Mormon, about Joseph Smith and whether he was a prophet or not, about Jesus Christ and even if he is the Son of God. And so I would recommend that you study those topics, that you go and preach my gospel, you go in chapter 10 of teaching skills, and you look in the back and look at the suggestions about teaching people who don't have a Christian background, because that's what you're going to be doing for 2 years. So be sure that you know the gospel, and if there are some things that you don't know, just rely on the Lord and he will teach you. Because when I didn't know a question to something, the Lord always gave me the words that I needed or the scripture that I needed.